Joining us right now to give us his take on all of this is my friend and yours, Donald Trump, on the Savage Nation. Where is Mr. Trump? He's on line 10. Donald, welcome to the Savage Nation.
Hello, Michael.
Well, what a world we're living in. It's a little different than even the 4 weeks ago when we were enjoying a party outdoors in Palm Beach. What is your reaction, Mr. Trump, to Mubarak saying he will step down?
Well, I think it's probably something that's inevitably had to do it. He had no choice, and frankly, I don't even know if that's going to be satisfying the folks out on the streets. But he had
he had no choice. I'm surprised that they didn't behead him. You know, if they could get their hands on him, it looks like they tear him apart. Which leads us to the next question. Who do you think is going to profit from the chaos in Egypt?
Well, it's sort of interesting. You look at the countries that are somewhat friendly. Of course, when you say friendly, they've taken advantage. We've paid $68 billion to Egypt over a period of years. $68 billion. We've paid a lot of money to Tunisia, and these were two nations that were in our camp, and they're the ones that are going bad. You don't see Iran going bad. You don't see others going bad. You see Tunisia and Egypt. So we have the nations that this country is sort of watching over, and the ones that are sort of semi-friendly to us, even though all we're doing is basically bribing them to stay friendly with us, and they're losing control. We're losing control of those nations. So it doesn't say much about the current administration when all of our allies are going to probably end up going against us, because the person, and in this case I think we can obviously say the man that is most hostile to the United States will probably end up being the leader of Egypt.
And who would that be?
Well, I guess they have a couple of choices, but there are a couple of pretty nasty characters out there that are very much opposed.
Well, do you think Iran has anything to do with all of this turmoil in the Middle East? I mean, Iran is the enemy of freedom around the world. Ahmadinejad has clearly said he wants to wipe Israel off the map. Ahmadinejad has oppressed the Iranian people. When there was a democracy movement in Iran a few years ago, this government did nothing to help them, and yet the American media and this government seems to have been colluding behind the scenes to overthrow Mubarak. This is very worrisome, because with the rising of a radical Muslim ideology throughout the Middle East, nobody in America is going to benefit. Don't you agree with that?
Yes, I do, and I do agree that Iran probably has a lot to do with what happened. You know, they like the Suez Canal very much, but they like oil even more, and it's only a question of time. The minute we leave Iraq, they're going to take over those oil wells, and we're going to be sitting there like a bunch of dummies saying, boy, we just spent 10 years and over $1 trillion, $1.2 trillion as of this moment, and all we did is weaken Iraq to the point where Iran is going to walk in, take over the oil wells. If anyone's going to take over the oil wells, it should be the United States before we leave.
Well, I said that. I wouldn't have minded if it was a war for oil. I said it all along. Bush lied to us when he said that we would have reparations for the great expense of our men and our finances in the form of oil. We've not received one barrel of oil for free from Iraq. In fact, the minute they were liberated, they gave their contracts to your friends in China.
Yeah.
China got the contracts. The first contracts in Iraq for the oil, developing the oil, were given to China. You know that.
It's called lack of respect for this country and our leaders. It's unbelievable and unthinkable. And, you know, I don't know if you realize that Iraq has $15 trillion worth of oil under their ground. We should take out $1.5 trillion, which is what we spent on this war, in order to liberate Iraq, which is, by the way, going to go to Iran. There's no question about it in my mind. There's no question. You will look back in 2 years. Hopefully you'll remember it was me that predicted it, because I really said it 2 years ago. We have weakened Iraq to the point where they can't defend themselves against Iran. Iran, the minute we leave, they will walk in and they will take over Iraq, and what they really want is the oil.
Well, I have to tell you that 3 years ago, now we're getting again into a contest here, I published a book called Liberalism is a Mental Disorder, where I said this could be George Bush's greatest blunder, and the big winner will be an emerging Iran who will then restore its ancient borders, and we'll see an ancient Persia that moves fundamentally from Iran into Iraq and Iran will become one all over again, because the Iranians are fundamentally a Shiite nation, and the only counterbalance against them was the oppressive, horrendous dictator Saddam Hussein, who Bush executed along with his sons. And what happened was, into this vacuum stepped Iran. But Iran seems to be behind a lot of what's going on right now in Egypt. At least many of us believe that, especially when you analyze the Muslim Brotherhood. If you became president, Donald Trump, let's forget something we can't even predict. We can only say what we fear might happen or what we hope wouldn't happen. If you became president, if you should decide to run, Would you change the U.S. tax system, or would you alter the tax structure?
Well, I would alter and change. I'd do a combination of things, and I would create great incentives for people to go out and do a good job, and I would do one thing that would have to do with a different kind of a taxing structure. I would tax China for having cheated us so badly out of so many products and so many jobs. You know, if you look at China, what they're doing to this country is unbelievable. It's never happened before, except for OPEC, who has even been worse. I mean, OPEC is nobody has done to us. You know, it's interesting. Even though Egypt has no oil, or very little oil, but basically no oil, I said, watch. There's a little bit of a riot, and it'll probably turn into a big riot, which it did in Egypt. OPEC will now raise the price of oil because they're going to blame Egypt. In other words, anytime there's any kind of event, OPEC gets together and raises the price of oil because stupid people sit back and they say, oh, gee, there's a riot in Egypt. The people are rioting. Oil went up. Let's not blame OPEC. And isn't it amazing? They raised the price of oil $10 a barrel today. That's unheard of. $10 in one day. And they get away with it because everyone says, oh, gee, there's a problem in Egypt.
So, but if Egypt falls into the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then Yemen falls into the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they then control both sides of the Suez Canal, there in fact could be a nightmare scenario, truthfully.
Nightmare, and we could also do something about it very easily. You know, we're the most powerful nation on earth, but we don't use our power correctly.
Well, oh boy, now you know why I'm for Donald Trump for president. We should have said we don't know which way it's going to go. We back Mubarak, but we're sending the 101st Airborne and a naval fleet to the northern portion of the Suez Canal and to the southern portion, and we're going to defend the Suez Canal because it's a vital blood vessel for the entire world. But this president has done nothing, Mr. Trump.
He's not respected. He's not a respected man. He's not a respected president. It's very, very sad to see what's happening. And again, Tunisia and Egypt are rioting. I mean, you don't see other nations rioting, although they could, and that might be okay, because frankly, if some of the others riot, maybe OPEC breaks up and we'll actually be able, because they'll be in such disarray, we'll be able to make a better deal, not a worse deal in oil. But it's amazing.
I know you were quoted the other day as saying oil could come down. I was surprised by that. I don't understand your thinking. How would oil come down with such chaos in the Middle East?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. If we used natural gas, for one thing, and if we use nuclear, which we should be using, France is powering its entire nation, and I'm not a big fan of France for a lot of different reasons.
No, I agree with you. I've been behind nuclear energy for 15 years.
They virtually don't need outside sources. And if we use nuclear and if we use natural gas, you know, we're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. And if we use the kind of things that we should be using, we wouldn't even need the oil from these countries that are building new airports for $38 billion and that make us just look like an obsolete, ancient country. So if we used our powers and used our brain, we could again be the greatest nation on earth. But what's happened to our country is we're not respected. Our leaders aren't respected. I have Chinese friends. I'm not blaming them. If you can get away with something, you should. But they can't believe what they're getting away with the United States.
You were quoted, Mr. Trump, as saying some of your Chinese business friends have said to you they can't believe what they're getting away with, and frankly, they want to eat everything that they can of our society in the broad sweep. They're taking our technology. It started 20 years ago with them literally buying entire technological industries and moving them overseas. They don't let you do business there unless you share technology with them, which is unheard of. And that's how a nation falls apart, isn't it?
It's true, and we're falling apart. And when they say 5 years or 6 years, Ben Bernanke 2 weeks ago, he said 5 to 6 years before our jobs come back, to which I say, why are they going to come back if China's making all our products? I mean, you know, you're not going to be able to come back. So we are really, it's incredible. And then we have a great state dinner for the Chinese president who's ripping us off. You know, when I have enemies, I don't have state dinners for the enemies. I let the enemies know they're my enemy. And here's a guy gets off the plane. And by the way, I don't even know if you saw that fiasco. They couldn't even put the carpet down for him properly, right? It took them 10 minutes to put the carpet down.
Maybe the unions wanted more money to roll it out correctly.
That's an interesting statement. But I will say that you don't give state dinners to people that are ripping you off.
This is an interesting question, and it's one that I think needs to be asked, which is, let me just change it to New York State. You have a governor, Cuomo, who's a Democrat and a liberal, who actually is acting more fiscally conservative than most of the conservatives in the government of running the United States of America on a federal level. He said today, we cannot afford to continue running these kind of deficits, and he wants to cut back on health. He wants people to cut back on pensions, things like that. Do you think he's going to be successful? I mean, you obviously would agree with him, correct?
Well, I agree, and it's not like agreeing. You have no choice. We have tremendous deficits in New York. You can't raise taxes because everyone's just going to leave. So it's not like he has a choice. But so far, he's sending out lots of good signals.
Yeah, but here in California, we have a governor, Jerry Brown, who says we need more tax hikes or we're going to have Egyptian-style unrest here. Doesn't he realize that the earners are going to leave this state if he keeps it up? We're all going to move to Florida, and we're all going to try to join Mar-a-Lago?
That's right. They'll all come down to Florida, and they'll be members of my Mar-a-Lago club. But I have clubs in California, too. I have a great golf course in California, phenomenal, in Rancho Palos Verdes. And I will tell you, people are angry in California at the taxes and the tax struggle. They have a struggle in California, and I was surprised. I know Jerry Brown very well, and I was very surprised. He's actually talking about raising taxes, and I don't
a shocker, because he's posed himself as a moderate. Do you know the upper income in this state pays about 10.5% state tax on top of the federal tax?
Unbelievable.
10.5% state tax in this state. Florida, 0.
That's right. A lot of people moving down to Florida.
Yeah, I understand why. Now, let's go into some of the other entitlements, Mr. Trump. You know, say entitlements. The word itself puts my flesh on edge, because as far as I'm concerned, the only entitlement we have on earth is death and taxes, as someone wiser than I said. Where is it written that Medicare can't require higher co-payments and that Social Security can't be cut by a few percent each year, or that federal employees can't have their pensions cut by 2% a year for the next 5 years? Why should federal workers have it better than the average American worker?
Well, the politicians don't like to get into Medicare. They don't like to get into Social Security. And I even noticed that the Republicans, who are very conservative, don't want to talk about Social Security and Medicare. And maybe you'll have to talk to them. It's a very complex subject. But, you know, I view it differently. I don't like playing around with Social Security and Medicare. You know, people need it. Now, I will say this. Someday soon, I'm going to get a Social Security check. I shouldn't be getting a Social Security check.
Wait a minute. Let me enjoy that laugh. What are you going to do, gamble in Atlantic City with it?
Security check. And people that make a lot of money, they don't even know. They won't even know they got it, okay?
Right.
And there are people that make so much money, they literally wouldn't even know that they got it. So at a certain point, maybe you should start looking at that. But I will say this.
But wait a minute. How about cutting the Social Security for people who aren't even citizens? And how about raising the retirement age by 2 years? They did that in France recently. There were riots, and then the riots were suppressed, and it was over. Why don't we just raise the retirement age by 2 years?
Michael, what the current politicians want to do is go back to raising for people that aren't born because they're afraid that maybe they'll lose a vote. But that's not that's not going to be the thing. The thing that we should be doing is taxing China, is taxing Mexico, who's taking a lot of jobs out.
Right.
Is taxing India, where we have everybody working in India in the credit card business. Everybody's working in India. You have a problem with your credit card, you're calling up somebody in India to straighten it out. We should be for outsourcing. If somebody wants to outsource to India, I think that's great. Let them pay a tax, a big fat tax, and then you'd be able to lower taxes. Because you know, you say what you want about taxes in this country, we pay the highest taxes in the world. And the reason is that every country, so many countries, in particular China, is eating our lunch.
I agree with you. We're going to ask the callers. Maybe one will have the luck to get on with Donald Trump here on the Savage Nation. The minute we come back from our commercial break, one question for Donald Trump, whether it be on Egypt or domestic policies. Also, during the break, while listening to the commercial messages, you can go on to shouldtrumprun.com. I'll be right back.
Savage.
Speaking with one of America's most well-known businessmen, he's also a very famous media personality, Donald Trump, and I believe he should run for the presidency for a couple of reasons. You say, well, why? Number one, he's a businessman, and in my book, Trickle Up Poverty, I conclude by saying run the country like a business, not an empire. Number two, he has an immense capacity for paying attention to detail, as I know from the buffet table at his club. And I'm not joking about that. You can judge everything by a buffet table. Right now, we're going to ask Donald Trump a most important question. Mr. Trump, Al Gore has been quoted today as saying the blizzards that are hitting America are caused by global warming. What do you have to say to Al Gore?
I am so tired of this global warming nonsense. It is so ridiculous. And I don't know if you know what we're doing. We're retooling our factories so that we can't compete against China and others in order to protect against global warming, which doesn't exist. We have the coldest winter in New York that I can ever remember. I've been around a long time, and I have never seen snow after snow, storm after storm. People can't leave their buildings, and I'm hearing about global warming. And then these global warming guys, they always have an answer. They say, oh, no, the extremely cold weather is another sign of global warming.
Right. They say that the havoc that's being created as a result of hotter, dry spells caused by their science, which is all based on fraud. No, it's crazy, but there's a very serious policy. There are very serious policy mistakes being made based on this fraudulent science. Look at the contracts being given over to so-called green energy. A study was done in Scotland. It showed that each kilowatt of energy driven by windmills costs far more than that driven by hydroelectric or even that by coal-fired plants.
Right. That's right. Well, what's going on is absolutely insane. And I always ask the question, as you have these factory owners that are going out of business, trying to gear up for global warming so that we don't warm up the planet, I say, do you think really that China is gearing up their factories? Have you ever been to China and seen their factories? They are spewing coal and spewing garbage. And I'm not saying that's the right thing, but I will tell you, they're not believers in global warming other than with their mouths. They talk about global warming. And this country, what we're doing to our factories, we're making it impossible for these people to produce goods and services at a fair price. So when I
tariffs on China, we both agree on tariffs on China and getting some leadership in the military to use our military, to charge for the use of our military, as you've said with South Korea, for example. I believe we should have sent our military to both sides of the Suez Canal and protect the Suez Canal from any takeover. But thus far, not one word from anyone in the government with regard to using our military properly. Donald Trump, when are you going to decide? After The Apprentice is over?
I'm going to decide, sometime in June, during the month of June.
Well, let's hope that you do run, because America does need a very serious businessman to run the country, not a career politician. I'd recommend people go to the independent website, shouldtrumprun.com, and, see what's on there. Any final words here for the audience on the Savage Nation?
Well, I just say this, Michael. We're not a respected country anymore. That's why it's Egypt and Tunisia that's rioting, not other countries that we don't control. They don't respect us. They don't like us, but I think it's even beyond like anymore. They don't respect us, a much more important word. And if I do decide to run, I can guarantee you one thing, we'll be respected again as a country.
Remember what Teddy Roosevelt said, walk softly and carry a big stick? I think with Obama we have a guy who walks softly and carries no stick.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Donald Trump. A pleasure to have you on the Savage Nation. When I return, your calls and more, all the news